Hello, everyone. Min-Q here, and I wanted to create this sort of standalone podcast episode because, well, as I probably don't even have to explain, there is so much uncertainty and anxiety about the future of the animation industry right now and where everything is headed. Everything that's happening with AI and just the changing studio landscapes and all the layoffs and even the projects these days that do get made and do come out just seem to be really deteriorating in the innovation and quality department day by day. And so overall, there are just a lot of trajectories that are emerging that are very justifiably making a lot of people very worried about where everything is headed. And as some of you may know, in my other life, I am also a practicing astrologer and human design reader. And in that life, my job is to be able to, using both of these modalities, astrology and human design, look at the future transits and interpret them and, accurately predict the future flow of events or occurrences or keynotes or themes. And this applies not just to personal charts, but also to, larger entities or industries or, global events as well. And as anyone can imagine, me having one foot in the animation industry, the future of the animation industry and the film industry is something that I look at quite extensively through the lens of astrology and human design. And doing so has provided myself with such a grounded sense of clarity and, more importantly, direction as an artist. And so I thought I might combine two of my worlds and give a forecast about the animation industry from this astrological and human design perspective in hopes that others might find this information as grounding and clarifying and direction giving as it is for me. And, just to really help anyone out there who is struggling right now in this sort of fog of uncertainty, which I think can be very, very painful. It can be really excruciating to navigate this. And, that's exactly what human design and astrology is for. And so, again, I hope this recording reaches the right people who will find it encouraging. Now, before getting into all of that, I do want to mention one caveat, which is that I understand that there is this opinion out there in the animation industry or the larger film industry held by some that basically says, the film industry works in cycles. And just as there are downs, there are ups. And maybe we're on a down period right now. Maybe we're in a lull. But just everyone wait. And before we know it, we're going to be on an up period again. And the jobs are going to come back and the security is going to come back and everything is going to go back to how it was. And while I can definitely understand that maybe that is coming from a good place, I do want to make it clear right now that that is not going to be the message of this video or this recording. And while I understand that that type of message or opinion might be coming from a potentially good place, I actually do think it is coming from a rather limited point of view of not really considering all the factors that are happening in this change. And I also think it is a very biased point of view, which kind of assumes that the old way of operating was the best way for artists to thrive, and those were the glory days. And I also think it is potentially a very damaging message as well, because I just think even looking at it from a surface level, it does neglect the very real pains that I imagine a lot of people are feeling right now who are out of jobs and, again, lost in this fog of uncertainty, telling them to just keep waiting and keep your hopes up that things will return is actually not a very helpful or encouraging message, But I also do think that opinion is limiting because when when you really think about it, the only constant in the universe is change. That saying tends to be true, but the new ways of adapting, surviving, and thriving in that change, that never comes from people who say, let's just go back to the old way or just wait till things return back to normal again. I honestly think that's the opposite direction of encouragement people need right now. But I also can understand that for some people, that's the only ideal or belief that they feel like they can handle right now. And if that does happen to be you, and I think you'll kind of instinctively know if that is you by now, if you're listening to this. If you are thinking, hey, I don't really have the capacity right now to contemplate other possibilities of the future because maybe that's what's going to lead to more fear and anxiety for me, if that is the case, I can pretty affirmatively say that this recording is not for you. And I actually do recommend that maybe you don't listen to it for now. And maybe you could even consider returning to it at a different time in the future when maybe the turn of events in the future maybe reminds you of this recording or inspires you to return. So just want to put that out there first. But if you are someone who is kind of looking around at all the changes that are happening and are really instinctively understanding, hey, this time the change is pretty seismic, it's pretty foundational, and I understand that there is an inevitable quality to this change, and I just want to know what to do. I just want to know what to do now in order for me as an artist to creatively and authentically not only be able to, support myself, but also to really experience full artistic fulfillment, authentic artistic fulfillment that perhaps you might have never experienced in the past industry, with openness to hope and possibility. Then I would say this recording is for you. And again, I want to reiterate that is my point of view too, that there is so much hope and possibility awaiting us in the future if we are able to really open up our minds. And so some of the information that I might be talking about today might sound a little bit daunting or intimidating. And if that does happen, then I also want to really remind that it is important not to catastrophize, just in general, but especially here, not to catastrophize or listen to everything in fear, because that's certainly also not my perspective. There is big change coming, and that is going to lead to a lot of destabilization in all sectors of society. But I also want to really reiterate now that by no means is it the apocalypse or is, humanity ending. It's just change, and change can make people just feel very uncomfortable. And that's what we're really talking about here. But in the heart of it, these modalities exist to help people become more grounded and centered and find clarity in change rather than instilling fear. And that's certainly my perspective. And I hope if you listen to this whole recording, I hope that hope and possibility is really what you take away from this. So to kind of summarize everything that I'm going to be talking about today, first I'm going to be talking about the big kind of global changes, especially in how it relates to animation that we're going to see in the next few years from a human design perspective. And then I'm going to talk about what that might look like, maybe 10 ways in which we might see those changes happen in the American Western animation industry. And then I'm going to talk about the next few years, the big changes that are happening from an astrological perspective. And then I'm going to end this recording with 10 tips on how you can best navigate this change and how you can really start that journey now, so you can be sort of an early adapter and frankly in a much better position on the other side of this change. But before going into all of that, I want to briefly talk about what human design is, because I'm sure for many people who are listening to this, you might be very well aware what astrology is, but maybe not human design. Maybe this is the first time you're hearing about this. Although I do think it's gaining a lot of traction and popularity in culture out there. But basically, human design is this self-knowledge system. It's kind of like astrology in that way, that kind of synthesizes astrology and the Indian chakra system, the Chinese I Ching, and the Kabbalistic Tree of Life kind of into this one whole, like, synthesized system that shows you how you can best make decisions for yourself from your truest aligned self. So your life kind of leads you down the highest expression of its fulfillment, kind of this deep soul fulfillment that you really came here on earth to experience. And I'm sure some people who are listening to this might be wondering, well, why human design again? Like, why are we considering its perspective? So for me, at this point, I've done hundreds of human design readings, and there is just this unmistakable accuracy to human design that is quite astonishing. And I study and work within a lot of different modalities as well, and it is a level of just resonance and accuracy that I honestly quite have not seen anywhere else. And this goes to when I give personal readings to people, but also, human design is this vast ocean of knowledge. It is truly kind of this seemingly endless ocean of knowledge. And when I see how that applies into all different sectors of life, as we will talk about today in the whole global cycle scheme, it is just remarkably accurate. So that accuracy that I've witnessed time and time again is what makes me really, trust in this system and feel comfortable sharing its perspective as the main foundation of today's kind of forecast. So that was my little intro on what human design is, and now to go into what it says about the future and the future of the animation industry and all that. So yeah, within the human design system, there are these markers of time called global cycles. And global cycles is exactly what it sounds like. They are these chapters of time that are marked by certain very strong dominating themes, or what in the system is called dominating frequencies. And each global cycle runs for about 400 years. So right now, as of this recording, which I'm recording this on April 28th, 2024, we are currently at the tail end of this current global cycle. And this global cycle is called the Cross of Planning, and it ends in 2027. So as of this recording, we have less than 3 years before this global cycle ends, and we enter into a brand new global cycle, and that global cycle is called the Cross of the Sleeping Phoenix, and that one's going to last another 400 years. So that's going to be the global cycle that we all will spend the rest of our lives in. So as this current global cycle ends, as the dominating frequency that kind of really ruled over the world for the past 400 years starts to pull away and dissipate and break down, we're going to see that kind of breakdown reflected in our outer world and also kind of in our own minds, which might be why some people might feel a little bit more disoriented these days and are feeling like they are kind of either entering into a haze or waking up from a haze and waking up from something into a new belief system or whatever. But to kind of simplify and generalize what this change is, we are basically going from a very community-based, institutionalized, systemic, planned way of living the human life into a more self-empowered, individualistic, and self-reliant way of living. And before taking that in from fear goggles or from a hysteric point of view, it's not that community is going away. It's just that most likely because we are now being awakened into our own authenticity. You're going to see that, you already see that a lot out there in the cultural psyche, that word thrown thrown around a lot, right? Authenticity. Because there's going to be more increased importance on one's own truth. How community is probably going to change is that unless there is really a genuine, authentic connection with the other, so if it's a community that is based off of inauthentic connection for more strategic reasons, that community or relationship is going to become harder and harder to maintain because it's not honoring our own truth. So we're moving into kind of like a reimagining of what community might be. On the shadow side, of course, the keynote of this Cross of the Sleeping Phoenix, this new age, is going to be I have nobody to depend upon for survival other than myself. I only have myself to trust, And again, it's important not to take this info in from a place of fear, because it's not that one paradigm is better than the other. The next global cycle that is coming is not morally better than this current paradigm. Any paradigm or any idea or ideology carries both a light or exalted expression and also a shadow or a detrimented expression. So this cross of planning that made everyone bow down to this idea of community, even though it was able to give rise to, all these mega cities and these incredibly rich and complex ways that the human life is run. And, you get Amazon the next day or sometimes the same day. On the flip side, the shadow side of that, because the shadow side of community is tribalism, it gave rise to 2 world wars, the atomic bomb, and also, global warming and climate change, which is probably going to go down as one of the most destructive forces in modern history. So again, no paradigm is better than the other. Although, of course, there are going to be people who adapt better and thrive easier in this new paradigm, as well as a lot of people who are going to have a very, very challenging time with these global changes that we're going to be experiencing in the next few years in this new paradigm in the beginning. But basically, so what happened was in 1615, when we entered into this current global cycle, that dominating frequency, and again, that dominating frequency is this idea that our subconscious minds kind of all bow down to, this kind of radio wave signal that our brains are subconsciously kind of tuned into. That thought or that idea changed from, instead of relying on the sovereign rule of monarchs or royalty or emperors to ensure my survival, it's we the people, it's my neighbor, it's my town folk, it's power in numbers that will actually ensure my best chance of survival. And so what you see historically from that point on in the next 400 years, starting from 1615, is you not only see these incredible historic rise of revolutionary civilian forces, you also see that coincide with all these historic, iconic execution of kings, as well as this is how the global frequency, the dominating frequency works, is not only does it really condition our internal motivation and thoughts and actions, it also supports and favors outcomes in our outer environment. So it supports or favors events that align with that frequency. So what that means is, what we saw also in the past 400 years was America, or the United States, which is the ultimate kind of cross of planning product, because it's a nation built on this idea of we the people, right? You see that nation win a war against a monarchy. So, that's just one example of how the dominating frequency favors or does not favor certain events historically, or certain events that we see in our outer material world. But within this cross of planning frequency or ideology, underlying it all is what's called this quote unquote agreement. And it's this handshake agreement, because without agreement, you do not have a community. Even if you think about the most liberal, like open-minded community, they'll probably have this underlying unspoken or spoken understanding of an agreement or a code of conduct. And if you go against that, then you are going to be excommunicated or ostracized from that community, right? You are going to be the other. You can think of it kind of like that. So underlying all of this is what's called an agreement, and it's this handshake agreement that carries this keynote of, if I do this for you, you do this for me. If I scratch your back, you scratch mine. That's what community, that idea of I'm going to play my part and you're going to play your part, and that's how our community is going to ensure our survival. That's how communities are formed, right? So what that dominating frequency kind of conditioned all our motivations and ideas and thoughts to be was to be kind of happily a small cog in a giant machine that is the institution or the community. So in the past 400 years, we see all sorts of institutions rise that we've quite frankly never seen before in human history. Like even a megacity, which is another big example of a cross of planning institution. Megacity, as its definition currently stands, is something that never existed before 1615. And again, a megacity is a perfect example because when you think about a megacity, it is only well-oiled and run properly if the garbage disposal guy does their job, if the banker does their job, if there's someone at the school to take care of your kids and educate your kids while you go off to the studio and do your small part on this giant collaborative effort that is a movie, so that you playing your small role results in this movie that's going to entertain the masses. And that's how a megacity is kind of run, right? So that's just one example, but there are all sorts of cross of planning institutions that really make up our current modern way of living. So, the banking system, insurance companies, the two-party system of our U.S. government. The U.S. government in general is very much a cross of planning institution. Corporations, hospitals, the public school system. So all of these things are cross of planning institutions, and because now the cross of planning era is coming to an end, all the institutions that I just mentioned before, you're probably going to see a theme of deterioration in them or a breakdown in them. So, for example, we saw like the bank failures last year, right? Most likely you can kind of bet your money that those are not the last bank failures we'll see in the coming years as the breakdown accelerates. How you might see this in government is not only, the two-party system, because again, that agreement that I mentioned is the foundation of these systems. What you're going to see is more disagreement, which means that you're going to see the Democrats split in half, and then that splitting into more, and then you're going to see the Republican side split in half, and then you're going to see that split into more, until there's so many splits that there is no unifying ideal or unifying idea that unites a system, if that makes sense. So other examples that we're probably going to see more are, we're going to see more and more increased strikes. So strikes are something that the human design system, by the way, these predictions are more than 20 years old, because they were introduced pretty much soon after the human design system was shared with the world. But like 20 years ago, when human design was talking about this time, they talked a lot about how there are going to be more and more strikes in all sectors of society that will eventually lead to no agreement being able to be reached, and therefore people just leaving their jobs or deciding not to do that job anymore. So that's going to be really interesting to see. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, because the megacity is also a cross of planning institution, we're probably going to see a deterioration or a breakdown of megacities in the coming years in all sorts of different ways. And of course, those breakdowns are going to happen in different paces, right? I don't think it's going to be a scenario where all the megacities go down all at once. Fingers crossed, hopefully not. But what we're going to see is all these megacities, these urban centers, just becoming harder and harder to sustain because the supporting frequency is just not there anymore, and which is going to lead to a sort of breakdown. And so it's going to be really interesting to see that process as well. Again, different speeds, different paces, different stages, all over the world. But again, I'm going to reiterate this as much as I can because I know some of this information can sound daunting. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And one of the main reasons this is happening is because really humanity is kind of entering a new stage in their evolution where it is time for humanity to really understand how important one's own truth is, or self-empowerment is. And so you're going to see that word thrown around a lot in the cultural psyche, that word authenticity. It's because people are awakening to their own truth that these agreements are actually harder and harder to reach, because this tribal agreement or this community agreement is really only possible if there is a sort of sacrifice of one's own authenticity, right? At least to the scale that we've seen. So again, it's not that community is going away in the future. We're just going to feel the importance and the need to form authentic, genuine community through genuine connections, rather than what was the case of the past, which is forming community primarily based off of fear of survival. I hope all of that made sense. If you have any questions or if there is anything confusing, please leave a comment and I'll try to answer it, or I'll try to create a new video going in depth of all of that. But that's kind of the breakdown that we're going to see globally, and again, it's not all bad. Another example that I can come up with as maybe this is a good thing is that, in the past 400 years, the other word in human design for community is tribalism. They're kind of like, different sides of the same coin that is inseparable from each other. So as we move into the cross of the sleeping phoenix, even world wars are probably going to be much more harder to start because, if the cross of planning frequency conditioned everyone to, for example, if you're a US citizen back in like the 1940s or something, if your frequency your mind probably was more along the tune of like, oh yeah, I'll gladly sacrifice my life for democracy and for the world and for my country. What you're going to see that frequency change into as people become more self-empowered and honor their own sovereignty and truth is like, I'm not going to go to war for my country that doesn't even support me and can't even take care of me, like that. So you can imagine how that can lead to, world wars becoming much and much harder to start, right? So again, it's not all bad, it's not all good, it's just different. So finally, what does that mean for the animation industry? So this next section I wrote down 10 patterns we might see in the animation industry as this global cycle ends. And as you could have guessed, because the animation industry or the film industry at large is very much to its core, in its DNA, a cross of planning institution, because we all know how animation is made is very much like this institutionalized corporate community effort. That's the part of animation that is probably going to go away. The individual expression of creating and making art and making animation is not going to go away. It's just that the institutionalized aspect of how we used to, or how we now make animated films, is just going to become harder and harder to support until it begins to really break down. So what does that look like specifically? So here are 10 patterns we might see in animation as this global cycle ends. Number 1, more disgruntled employees, which, yes, I know, as if that's news to anyone. But again, to put in context, it's not necessarily that people are just becoming more entitled, but people are really stepping into honoring their own truth and honoring their own self-empowerment. And so because that conditioning frequency of the past, which was very much self-sacrificial, is fading away, people are going to become, you're going to see people become more comfortable speaking out their own truth and more comfortable disagreeing to this, community bargain, which is going to become more and more intolerable. Number two, as people become more empowered, we're probably going to see more disagreements in animation, or even more breaking of agreements take place in animation. So this is, of course, going to happen in all sorts of ways and all sorts of manifestations, but one way it might look like is maybe on a show, more people saying like, hey, if you can't meet this very important need for me, then I'm just simply going to cease to work for you. You might see a little bit more of that, or if you can't honor this unspoken understanding between us, me the employee and you the employer, then I am going to leave. That kind of thing, which ties into the next point, which is number three: more trust-breaking behavior from old model authority or the corporate side, whether that be producers, executives, or studios. Again, because the cross of planning agreement was all based on trust, and that trust is breaking down and going away. I think what we'll see as we move closer to 2027 is all the various ways in which studios become less interested in honoring or keeping the trust of their employees. So I do think there is going to be just this general pattern of this deterioration of trust between the artist and the studio, until probably there is just not an agreement that is able to be reached. And again, this is going to be something not isolated to animation. We're probably going to see this in all different sectors of society. Number four, corporations and studios becoming more and more unstable. A studio job is no longer going to be the way to carve out a stable foundation for your life. Again, we're going to see this happen in more ways than one, but just one example of how I've seen, studios becoming more unreliable and more unstable is, when I entered the animation industry, this idea of a tentpole movie, like staking a tentpole release date was, kind of your golden word. If you said your film was going to be released at a certain slot, then you really try to keep it. But now what we see in animation is pretty much a guarantee that if a film says it's going to release in spring of 2025 or whatever, that's probably going to move, right? So there's just going to be, and that's just one example, but you're just going to see a lot of more instability within the studio system that is never going to get better. So it's what you can expect is, maybe there might be, band-aid periods where it seems like it gets better, oh, is that improving? Do we finally have a solid plan? Only to be like, nope, going back to the drawing board, where just this kind of stability at a studio just does not become a realistic idea anymore. Number five, large collaborative efforts are going to become harder and harder to accomplish. Again, with all the above that I mentioned, as people become less and less inclined to self-sacrifice or compromise as a small cog in a giant machine, you're just going to see that, these traditional models of everyone, like having 200 people make one feature film, it's just going to become harder and harder to accomplish as the supporting frequency is just not there anymore. There's just no support from this kind of dominating frequency anymore. Again, not necessarily a bad thing. Because again, that you have to ask yourself, was that self-sacrificing inclination that the older generation of animators had, was that a really good thing? Like back in the day, like people went to hospitals because of how much they broke their bodies to make an animated film, but once it was out, they went right back to the drawing board. And even when I entered the animation industry, there were still a lot of outcry against that pipeline of making animated films, but of course nothing was really being done to change it. And so again, we have to ask, was the old model of doing things the best way? Anyway, number 6, artists who create under the influences of homogenization, meeting more internal and external resistance, as this is going to become more challenging to maintain. So the animation industry is an incredibly homogenizing force, and homogenization is very much a cross of planning influence because it forces everyone to kind of agree to become a tribe, everyone to kind of adapt a similar style so they can create this collaborative effort that is a feature film that is cohesive, right? Think about what most people do to even enter the industry. They go to schools or conventions in which they try to get as many tips on how to create a portfolio that is manufactured for the approval of others, not their own self, but the approval of a quote unquote outer authority, right? This way of making art is going to become the source of a lot of challenge and resistance, where people really begin to change the way they draw to fit an existing mold, thinking that that's going to buy them their way into a stable life. And yeah, this is how the animation industry, because the animation industry enforces this, is a very incredibly homogenizing force. And that homogenizing force, sort of enforces like a sameness on everyone's work rather than uniqueness and authenticity. But even if you just think about what AI is, it is this mindless entity that takes these patterns and creates something that is almost solely a product of the law of averages, right? So in this way, the more homogenized someone's artwork is, there's probably going to be a trend toward that becoming more and more devalued, while the more unique and individualized and self-empowered someone's artwork is, that's actually going to become more valued, which leads to number 7, which is the flip side, which is number 7, artists who carve out more individuated, unique paths, rising to find fulfillment and success. And that success, again, is probably going to look very different in this new paradigm. And it's not going to be like a mass success necessarily, but it's going to be this true internal fulfillment for the artist. So each artist is going to kind of decide what their version of success is going to be in an individuated way, rather than what society agrees what success looks like. Okay, so it's going to be a more bespoke, customized version of success. But again, probably more artistically fulfilling and potentially providing that support and stability that old paradigm studio model is no longer able to provide. But the important thing here is that artists who unapologetically lean into the expression of their unique individuality, speaking of community, that's probably what's going to lead to a much more genuine, real, and authentic sense of connection and community too. So number 8 is art and commerce increasingly more difficult to unify. What you're going to see is more of a separation between films that are purely artistic and films that are purely commercial. In the past in Hollywood, there was this idea that you used to be able to do both. You used to be able to make a film that was both artistically had a lot of integrity and was sophisticated, but was also a commercial success. But that's also a form of a cross-planning agreement. And because the theme is going to trend towards more disagreement, that agreement is going to become harder and harder to reach. So what you're going to see is more of a separation there too. Number 10, potential studio shutdowns. Now, I won't go into speculating which studio might shut down first or when that might happen, because frankly, that's a little bit out of my scope. And I also want to mention that by shutdown, some of them might not be literal shutdowns. What I mean by shutdowns really is that perhaps they're going to cease to exist in the current or older model that we are more familiar with, and maybe exist in a different model that pretty much to us might feel like a spiritual shutdown, if that makes sense. And here's the thing to remember about when I say, all these cross-of planning institutions breaking down. Human design actually makes it clear that the breakdown, the pace is going to be different for everything, So some institutions will probably survive well into our later life, while I do think in the next coming years we are going to see more accelerated breakdowns in other sectors of society, if that makes sense. So again, I'm not going to go into speculating which studio might shut down when, because again, that's a little bit out of my scope. But the big reason why these studio shutdowns will most likely inevitably happen is because most studios exist within corporate structures, and those corporations are going to be very, very hard to maintain because of how unstable their profit-making methods become, and how the old ways of being really strategic and left-brained and really strategizing and planning for profit, this dominating frequency is in a way going to pull all the stops to, make sure instability happens. So there really is no, stocks or shareholding just is not perhaps a stable option for anyone anymore, A little bit of that is my guess, but I also do think it's pretty clear that, because, again, traditional studio systems are cross of planning frequencies and that is going away, most likely traditional studio systems are probably going to kind of cease to exist in the way that we know them for. Number 10, the old model of creating animated films becoming harder and harder to maintain. And this is kind of like a sum of all the points that I listed before this, but with all those listed, you could easily see how it would be hard to create animated films like we used to, right? Although I do think there are going to be a lot of traditionalists out there who want to maintain the old model of making films, because that's the only way most people know, at least in this Western animation industry, how to make films. I think we're going to see a lot of those, quote unquote, traditionalists really exerting a lot of effort to maintain kind of this old way or old world order of making animated films that I do think is going to be met with more and more resistance as we come closer to 2027. While I do think artists who are able to kind of be more self-empowered and not rely on studio systems, and carve out more individual paths to really find their own definition of artistic fulfillment, I think may find the level of artistic fulfillment that was frankly not afforded to them in this past older model, right? Because honestly, when I think of this older model, even though many people were employed, I don't think many people were truly artistically satisfied, I'm sure anyone who's listening to this either can relate to or know of people who just took on animation jobs to, put bread on their table, but their actual passion project was something else that they were doing on the weekends or on the sides, right? That's where real artistic fulfillment often is. It's not by doing the work that just puts bread on the table. My hopeful version is, and this is my personal opinion, but I do think people who find ways to do that, to focus more on where their true fulfillment lies and are able to really decondition from this older homogenizing industry of animation, I think this new paradigm, that's actually going to be possible. It's going to be possible to really truly feel artistically fulfilled without sacrificing your integrity, and I think, again, if my points from number 1 to number 10 sounded daunting or scary to anyone, I do think a good perspective to a good way to kind of frame all of this is to ask, was the old model really truly that good? This old model of, breaking one's body and burnout and overtime to get a film done. just to put bread on the table, while that real thing that you wanted to express, that true, genuine, artistic thing that you wanted to express, was kind of this like dangling carrot in front of you, you know? And so, as to not end on a gloomy note, again, if that was daunting, I also, at the end of this recording, have action items that you can take to help you navigate this new kind of upcoming period of change as well. But before going into that, now I want to look into purely the astrology of it all. Now we're switching over from human design to astrology. So I'm going to be looking at the astrology of the upcoming several years from a tropical/Western astrological perspective, because that's mainly the astrology that I practice. But yeah, the tropical/Western astrological forecast of the upcoming several years also has some major transits coming up that will bring some deep and profound generational changes to the collective. And the two most prominent ones are, first, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that is happening at 0 degrees of Aries in February 20 of 2026. So this is going to be a really big deal, which, you know, if you follow any astrologer online, you'll see more and more people mentioning this one really from next year, because it's going to be triggered a lot next year. And because it's really a big deal. But that's one aspect. And then there's another aspect, the alignment of the 3 outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, that really happens from 2025 all the way to 2027. That's another really big one that you'll hear a lot of people talking about in the upcoming years. Now, to talk about the first one, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries that happens in February of 2026, that's the one that I think will have a lot of deep significations for the film industry and the animation industry, and just the entertainment industry at large, because Neptune is the planet of entertainment, film, and especially animation. And the fact that Neptune is conjoining Saturn, which is the planet of limitations, boundaries, Saturn, the greater malefic, which brings forth a lot of deep challenges and even themes of alienation or reality checks, especially in the sign of Aries, which happens to be Saturn's fall, to me really speaks to some sort of like, you know, sobering wake-up call and reality check moment for the animation industry that also might carry a lot of confusion too. The first piece of this story, though, or the first movements of this story, we are actually going to see starting from next year. And this is because of how both planets move, specifically in their forward and retrograde motions, where they'll actually enter into Aries in 2025 before retrograding back into Pisces, where they both are at now, again in 2025. But to put it very simply, basically next year, 2025, spring, summer, and fall, I think are going to be pretty significant and meaningful when it comes to the development of the story. I think that's when we're going to see some major markers or perhaps turning points, which, by the way, we're also going to see not just within the realm of the animation industry, and because this is a pretty big, global, impactful aspect, we are going to see it globally. And my best guess would be it's also that global implication that has the effect into the animation industry, perhaps, that is a big part of the story. It's just that, again, because of the forward and retrograde motion, this isn't going to be the end of the story. We're going to see some forward movement, and my guess is that as new developments happen, you know, people trying to respond to it, and maybe some backward movement until things move forward again. And in February of 2026, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction perfects. And so that's probably around then is when we're probably going to see what this story is all about. And, you know, again, right now, and I'm speaking in April of 2024, it is hard not to see all the pieces seemingly coming together, right? With AI and the outsourcing and the layoffs and, the way that innovation and creativity has really not been supported and stifled in the animation industry. Personally, to me, it feels like, kind of the puzzle pieces filling themselves up, but, you know, yeah, just something to watch out for. And again, this is me now advising you as an astrologer. I would definitely try to plant the seeds of transition and adaptation now, if you can, before 2025, 2026, and 2027. So yeah, when it comes to the Saturn-Neptune thing, that was my spiel. Let me know if any of that sounds confusing date-wise, and I can try to do another astrological video, maybe another video just purely focusing on the astrology, and go a little bit more in-depth into that with graphics. Okay. So the other aspect, which is the, kind of triangular configuration between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, these represent more like big, truly seismic, large-scale, and global changes in astrology, because compared to the traditional inner planets, these planets move at a much slower pace. So in astrology, these planets often, because of their slow pace, they're kind of known as the generational planets. And again, these planets will form in a triangular, trine, and sextile formation that has really been mounting for the past century. But in the next few years, we're going to see them perfected, which is going to be a really important marker of time. So that period of time, really from 2025, I'd say all the way till 2027, and then post 2027, really, where we will be dealing with the ramifications of 2025 to 2027 for a while, I think will be a really big, massive turning point globally. And so this is where I really think, we're going to see perhaps that history doesn't necessarily repeat itself so neatly, where we might see, quote unquote, things that are unprecedented even more. And again, if you follow any sort of astrology related account online, you are going to see the astrology community talk a lot about these aspects in the coming years. So those are kind of the summary of the two major aspects that I see definitely speaking to big changes in the animation industry. So all of this, both the human design side of the forecast and the astrological side of the forecast, leads to my final point, which is answering the question, then what should I do? As an animation artist currently working in the animation industry, what type of actions or mental shifts do I need to make in order to adapt, not only adapt, but thrive in this new paradigm? So I'm actually going to start with kind of a very important caveat here before going into point number one, because I think this caveat actually leads into point number one. But my caveat is that there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of advice, because everyone is so unique and individual and different. For example, that advice of, yeah, just go lone wolf and do your independent thing by yourself, that's going to work for some people, but it's also really not going to work for other people, where for other people, for them to really be healthy and thrive, they might need a more structured, like, community environment to create. So the first thing to remember about these next 10 tips is that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all advice, which actually leads to my first point, which is to actually get a human design reading, which, I know that's what that sounds like. I know that sounds like I'm trying to be a shill, but, truly, when I decided that I was going to do this recording, I also really decided it was very important for me to try my best to speak directly from a place of truth, and to not like sugarcoat or try to, make things sound too palatable to whoever's listening. But truthfully, for me, what has helped me the most, what was probably the biggest like defining difference making thing for me, was getting a human design reading, and not just like, a quick Google of like, what's my human design? Oh, what does it mean to be a manifesting generator? Oh, I got to follow my gut. Not just like a Google version of it, but like a full hour and a half to 2 hour reading where you go really in depth into how you are uniquely designed to kind of navigate and express your creativity, because it's going to be so bespoke and customized and individual for you. You might be the same manifesting generator type as like your friend, but how you go about that and how you express that are going to be might look so different. So I know that it's helped me so much. I've seen how much it has helped so many other artists that I know. So yeah, that's my first point. And then the next 9 points are, I think, pretty solid. I think even though I just said, there's no universal one size fits all rule, I think the next 9 come as close to that as can be. So moving on. Number 2 is don't rely on corporations, studios, or any sort of quote unquote outer authority to provide stability for you. So again, really making that shift of kind of being more self-reliant when it comes to your financials, when it comes to supporting yourself, which might sound daunting at first, but again, you are going to see so many examples of people who do this, who are going to do this really well as we go into the future. I think as we see the changes happening in the next handful of years, it is going to be so easy right now to just focus on and magnify the negative aspects. You're going to see a lot of fear and hysteria projected on social media within the industry, and it's going to be easy to just zero in on those. But I would say, also notice the new success cases that are also going to be there. Definitely, because that's the way to keep your point of view balanced and real. Just focusing on the negative isn't necessarily truth. There are going to be just as many cases of artists carving out their own way to, really live a much more happier and satisfying and much more fulfilling artistic life than what was possible before. So I think it's going to be important to also take note of those cases as much as you observe maybe the breakdown that is happening, because that's going to be a really balanced kind of bird's eye point of view way of, I think, navigating this change. But again, number 2 was don't rely on corporations, studios, or any sort of outer authority to provide stability for you. And trust me, there are going to be ways. Actually, if I were to just mention one example, so how earlier I said that there are going to be, one of the key themes is going to be kind of this sort of breakdown of megacities, as the support that used to exist to sustain megacities are going to be kind of pulled away and just not there anymore. At first blush, that sounds really scary, right? Because you're like, well, for me, I live in LA. Oh my gosh, does that mean LA is going to become a harder and harder place to live? Yeah, potentially. But if you take that information just from a place of fear, then your mind is going to go into this, survival strategy mode of like, oh my God, does that mean that I have to find a place somewhere else? Where do I find, where should I live? I would say that's definitely not the correct point of view to approach this, because what you're also going to see is, and I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit more because it's actually one of the points, but new dreams or new hopes being seeded within you now. You are going to see so many different types of people who, even without knowing any of this information, are just called to a more natural, slower pace of life, where they are able to, buy their dream home maybe in a much more affordable place and live a healthier, more artistic, satisfying life. And so if you kind of look at the changes of the next coming years from that example, from that point of view, from that lens of like, oh, what are new ways of living that are going to be much more healthier and fulfilling and more satisfying and happier for me and my physical and mental well-being, I think that's actually going to provide the way. So Like fear doesn't even have to be a factor in it, if that makes sense. I really strongly believe in this, so if that was confusing, please leave a comment and I could, again, expand upon that even more. Number 3, find your true, authentic community. And, that is only going to happen in 2 ways. One, by sharing yourself more in a truly authentic way, not in a fake way, but really expressing your true, authentic self in whatever way that feels right and comfortable for you. Really engaging and connecting with people that you do strongly feel a connection with, even if it's just like responding to a post that you really like with a comment or a DM, And number 2 is by being okay of releasing relationships that don't feel aligned to you. Relationships that don't feel like they support your well-being or your authentic purpose anymore. Relationships that maybe don't feel like they honor your genuine, authentic self-expression anymore. Being okay with releasing those. That's another way you're going to really find your authentic community too. Number 4, begin to decondition from the homogenizing influences of the animation industry and really get back in touch with your uniqueness and authenticity. And so this kind of goes back to the point that I mentioned earlier about, when you think about the animation industry and how even, going to an animation school and going to a convention and listening to lectures, it kind of homogenizes you to draw a certain way. It says, hey, do this for your portfolio to get a job. Any area that you feel like before kind of forced you to compromise into maybe becoming an artist that you aren't, that's an area to take a look at now and begin to decondition and kind of retrain yourself so you do get more comfortable getting back in touch with your genuine way that you do want to artistically express yourself, because the animation industry can be incredibly conditioning. It's structured so you are set up for success only if you get an outer authority's approval. And when you are immersed in that system for so long, your mind kind of installs this filter where it constantly is questioning, where it is really centering your artistic expression into the other rather than yourself. And I really genuinely believe now is the time to kind of take back that centering and kind of, ask yourself, what would actually really make me happy if I were to draw something? What would actually really satisfy me as an artist? I think these are going to be questions that are going to become much more important to contemplate as we move forward into the future. Number 5, take these next handful of years as a transition. Be kind to yourself, experiment. It's not about these changes that I'm suggesting. It's not about going cold turkey on them, but really easing into them and becoming open now and beginning to look for new options now, especially when it comes to not only establishing a new foundation for income, but truly, I think what will be required, which is almost like a new mindset toward how we think about assets or money. There might be a lot of nervous system issues that come up, a lot of anxiety about, well, then how am I going to make money? This is the only system that exists in order for me to have a steady income. That's actually going to prove to not be true as these systems and structures become more unstable. That old belief is really going to be challenged, and there are going to be new ways you will be provided for. So a really important thing to know, and this is something that the human design system is kind of rooted in, is that if you are truly moving forward in your aligned path, you will be provided for. It might not look like the traditional model of being provided for by a weekly paycheck, but you will have what you need. And because the energetics of that providence is different, it's very possible that you'll actually be much happier with that type of providence. It's not going to be that old model of sacrifice happiness now to put bread on the table and defer your true dreams and desires for later. Number 6, create more options for yourself, but not from a place of survival or strategy, only from authentic interest, passion, and joy. And I'm going to get a little bit more technical here because there is a technical reason for this advice, and it's because in terms of the human design global cycles, again, we are moving from the cross of planning, which was, this is a technical term, a quad left paradigm, into the cross of the sleeping phoenix, which is a quad right paradigm. Roughly translated, that means that we are moving from a very left-brained, left-minded paradigm where calculating, planning, strategizing really awarded you. That's why it's called cross of planning, right? Because if you think about the modern way of life, every step of life is planned, right? Like, you're born, you go to preschool at a certain age, you go to elementary school at a certain age, you graduate college, and then you enter a job, and then you retire at a certain age, and then you live a certain way after you retire. You know, that way of life is going away. That kind of left-brained, strategic, planned way of life is going away. And so how you're also going to see this is, especially in the corporate world, as things become more and more unstable, people are going to try to attack things from the way they know, in this kind of very left-brained, strategic, calculating way. But what you're going to see is that the world, as the world doesn't support that anymore, all these executives trying to come up with new strategies to sustain and try to gain profit, it's just going to fall apart as unpredictable things happen that, kind of always undermine or cut down that strategy. Meanwhile, what you're going to see is like people who just follow their genuine interest without any financial strategy, or like without thinking about what's your 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan, somehow leading to success and somehow being provided for. Like, think about, even this is just one example that I recently thought about, was like, think about like crafting a viral TikTok. Oftentimes like a corporate company might try to craft a TikTok to go viral, but it's not going to work, right? Because it's so calculated and strategic. Meanwhile, that very right-brained, in the moment, purely from the gut, honest, authentic thing is probably what's going to connect with a lot of people and go viral. And so what you're going to see a lot is people who rise to success, when asked like, how did you get this started? You might see that kind of answer of like, oh, I just started this because I loved it. I really had no plan. I just started this and it kind of snowballed and now I'm here, So you're going to see the dichotomy of those two examples. And so this new paradigm is really, really not going to support, because we're moving again from a quad left to a quad right paradigm. It's not going to support like mental calculations and strategies, like executive corporate strategies to try to set up like a strong foundation. That is why it's so important, when you create more options for yourself, not to create more options from like a place of survival or strategy. Not to be like, well, what else can I do that can make money? Oh, maybe I could do like, drop shipping or whatever. Maybe I can open an Etsy shop. That's all strategic thinking, right? Instead, kind of following your authentic interest or passion that might not look like anything that you've done before, that might be the key to actually giving you more, sustenance and fulfillment in the future. And so this is where I also say, do the thing you always wanted to do now, but not through any outer authority. So anything where you have to get permission to do it, don't try to go through all those hoops to do it. Try to do it in your own terms now, If you want to make a feature film, sure, maybe you don't have, $200 million to do it magically now, but you can still tell that story in your own terms now. If you want to make a graphic novel, don't go through an agent and a publishing company, because, even that paradigm is going to become more and more unstable and less rewarding, but maybe finding your own outlet and your own form of expression to do that, because you have the tools now to tell that story that you want to tell. Maybe it's, again, not a fully animated $200 million feature, but you still have your words and your ability to draw. So I would really find ways to, have total ownership over what you do and not try to make something through another authority figure, and just do it now, if that makes sense. Number 7, so this kind of connects to what I was saying before, don't succumb to the sunk cost fallacy. And this is something that I think is actually a huge factor that is really holding so many people back from actually doing what they want to do. But it's this idea of like, well, I already invested this much time and money into the animation industry, and so therefore that's the only industry that I should be in, and the industry's in LA, so I can't really move anywhere. That kind of thinking might prove to be more destructive, and kind of keep you from actually reaching the success that you need to. So just something to watch there. And again, it doesn't mean like, okay, quit all your jobs and sell your house tomorrow and then move to the city or the countryside that you always wanted to. But again, seeing these next few years as a transition year, making that first step, planting that small seed. So, during these transition years, it actually is something that can grow, I think might be a really good idea. Which ties to point number 8, which is honor your new dreams. Now is the time where the universe might be seeding new hopes and new dreams and new visions of how you want to live in the future. And those dreams might actually be very important and very significant, and really dreams that you are meant to follow. So, be an early adapter in that sense. Number 9, really being mindful of mental and energetic hygiene. So, obviously, as the world goes through these changes, actually, as we are going through it now, but as it ramps up in the next few years, you will probably see a lot of catastrophizing from all around you as people just become more increasingly disoriented by the things happening around them. And, it's going to look like these seeming security blankets are being slipped away, and society is going to look like it's going to become more destabilized. It is really important to, keep an even mind and really not get swept away in the fear of it all that I think a lot of people are going to be projecting outward, because that kind of energy is really infectious. And not only that, it will, if you are making decisions from that place of fear and anxiety, most likely it's not going to be the correct decisions for you. So, of course, you can observe and have compassion for people who are going to be projecting a lot of fear and anxiety outward, but it's also going to be that much more important for you to also center yourself on what gives you joy, what your passions are, what your genuine interests are, and also all the positive examples that are going to arise where people do carve out a much more happier life for themselves. So again, I always like to recommend, especially in these changing times, keeping more of a bird's eye view rather than an anti-view, which whenever it comes to fear, it's always going to be easier to revert to an anti point of view. But again, I'm really kind of trying to keep a wiser mind about everything, and seeing things from a larger perspective, I think, is going to be really important. And finally, number 10, creating more options for yourself also creates options for other people. So what I mean by this is that as you kind of carve out your own individuated path to express your artistry, and as more and more people do that, what that's going to signal to other people is, here are all these other ways of, being your own artist and supporting yourself and living in a really fulfilling way where you don't have to sacrifice any of your artistic integrity. And that's actually what's going to help more people, is the availability of other new options that arise in the future. And most likely not, to be honest with you, most likely not kind of sticking to this one older way of this known way of making money that probably a lot of people are going to be talking about. You know, a lot of people are going to be saying, well, this old model, this is the only way to make money, so we should try to revive it. You know, I do think that's going to be akin to, you know, someone leading a bunch of people into like a ship that is going to be sinking in the sea, you know? Um, so, even within the human design system, when we talk about Cross of the Sleeping Phoenix, basically post 2027, it is talked about a lot how, you know, it's really the self-empowered individuals who are living a unique, individuated life that are going to actually have the most capacity to help other people. So there is this double importance, because doing this will not only lead to yourself being happier, but it's also going to be the catalyst for the most positive change for others. So, yeah, that's kind of everything that I had prepared today. And I'm sure it was a lot for some people. I hope it wasn't too confusing. But again, I really hope more than anything that despite all the changes that we might see in the next few years, what comes through in the end is how I genuinely feel, which is that there is a possibility for a future where we all live much more satisfying and happier artistic lives that are supported, that have security to it too. I really do believe that if you are able to really follow your passion and your joy and decondition from a lot of the homogenizing forces of the older industry model, there is a much happier future for you. And, you know, one of the reasons why I do astrology and human design is because I get so much internal emotional reward and satisfaction from encouraging and supporting artists really get to that path where they feel like they can really genuinely and authentically express what they've always wanted to express, what their soul came on earth to express, you know? So, yeah, I'll just really quickly mention that, you know, if you wanted to get a consultation from me, a human design or astrology consultation, you know, I'd be honored to read your chart and help you and support you and encourage you along the way. You can visit me at my website, cosmic-garden.com, to book a reading, or there's also info on my Instagram page as well. If you had any specific questions come up listening to this recording, also feel free to leave a comment too, and I can try to answer that as well, because I'm sure this was a lot to take in and potentially might have, you know, left you with even more questions than answers. Hopefully not, but you know, I'd be happy to answer any questions for you as well. So yeah, hope this was helpful, and yeah, bye for now. Okay, so we are trying, I think this is what it's supposed to be like. Okay, so just relaxing into myself, envisioning sitting in front of me is my highest self, just imagining that, and just trying this out. So basically what I'm doing right now is I am recording a sample, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this sample basically onto this computer, and then see how it is, see what the megabytes are like. And right now, especially today, I'm just going to keep practicing my speech, and eventually talk out the loose order of things that I want to convey with out of town radio.